Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from the Tamarack Tap Room in Woodbury, Minnesota. The Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
What a great day.
It is a great day, isn't it?
It really is. It's been a beautiful day out there. The tap room here, gorgeous. Like, it has got that rustic, brick look. The people here have been amazingly friendly, right from the greeters all the way down.
So Kenny asked me earlier today, he goes, what is your appeal to the tap room? Why there? And I said, it's the service. It's the service. It's the people that, like, you walk through the door and you immediately feel cared for and they want to take care of you and all the rest of it. It is. It's really cool. So this is episode 500. We are live at the Tamarack Tap Room. There's a whole heap of people here. Thank you so much for making the time to come out and watch the show live. Steve and I have been in conversation over the past, several weeks, but certainly over the past 24 hours, talking about what has gone really well in the first 500 episodes. So what do you want to see more of? And where is there some opportunity for improvement? What can we do even better? And so your feedback remains the most important driver of that. So if you write in live@asknoahshow.com and let us know, hey, this is something we really liked, we'll do more of that. If there's something you want to see more of, then let us know that too, and we'll make some time to do it. So we took some time today to go to Micro Center. When's the last time you were at a Micro Center?
The last time was when you and I went, whenever it was. It wasn't this self. Was it last self or two selves ago? I don't know. We don't have any up in our neck of the woods. So
we went over, if you've never been to a Micro Center, it's a fantastic experience. The way it was described, like Kenny Schmidt described it as the store for nerds. You go in there and you can get, it's what everybody wanted the big box electronic stores to be. But they have actual rack mount equipment, those sorts of things, and it's all available to you. And it's different. It's just different. As we were kind of walking through there, we came across, was it a 52-inch monitor? Is that right?
I thought it was 57. I thought it was 57.2, something like that. It
was
what, large.
Steve? I took a picture. So it was a Samsung Odyssey Arc G97NC. It was a 54.6-inch 4K UHD display. They had it in a vertical configuration. So the way they had set it up was they had the monitor coming up vertical. So it actually went over your head and you had to look up. It's a curved monitor, right? So you almost looked up. And we've got a microphone that we can hand around. If somebody wants to raise their hand, we'll hand it to you. But how big is too big of a monitor? So is that a thing?
I would say it depends on how close you get to your monitors, right? So I tend to be like an arm's length and then some away. That monitor, I probably would have to sit back 1.5 meters or more just to be able to effectively use the space. Would I say there is too big of a monitor? Not really. It depends how big your room is. If you're going to go sit on the couch, then a big monitor might be awesome. You might have to turn up the font a little bit. I'm starting to get old man eyes, but other than that,
that would work for you. So let me back up and ask one other question. If I told you had two choices, you could either have a multi-monitor setup or you could have a single ultra-wide, which route are you going?
I have chosen the multi-monitor setup for a number of reasons, not least of which is when you go to play a video game, if you have a single monitor on either a weird resolution or the ultra-wide, which will stretch the game and make it kind of weird, that's somewhat problematic. On the flip side, though, there have always been problems with multiple monitors in the past, like monitors moving around, or there's a bug out there that lots of people experience, and it seems to come and go. We've talked about this on the show, where one monitor or the other won't come on after sleep, and you actually have to just like tap. It's not that it's off; it just doesn't get signal until you tap the back of the monitor for some reason.
Yep. Yeah, I've had that. The other thing I've started to experience at some great cost to myself is I've tried to use like multi-display link, or not display link, but MST, basically where you run a DisplayPort cable to link the monitors together, and I have not found that to be a great experience, if I'm honest with you. I've also tried using DisplayPort over Thunderbolt. I found that works okay if you are using either different monitors or if they don't go to sleep. But I found that it's not really ideal. So I would respectfully submit the only reason we ever went to multi-monitors was because we didn't have enough screen real estate on a single monitor. And in a day and age where you can buy a 5K or 6K, or I think Dell has up to an 8K monitor that's 50 some inches, like that's the equivalent of having 3-4 monitors, but you got it all driven with a single DisplayPort cable. I think I'd go one display all day long.
I'm still not sold on that because I have to have so many, like, I have terminals open for live output, and a terminal on a vertical monitor, when you're watching scrolling text, super useful.
Yeah, and I suppose to your point, no matter how wide you get, like you're paying a lot more for pixels to get this ultra-wide style thing, it's not super helpful.
No. Nope.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that we're going to do as we talk about what it looks like as we go into episode 501 and on is we're going to try to carve out some space. We're thinking of calling it Steve Skin. So we introduced you to a lot of this technology, open source stuff, right? And there's an ability to get things started. You get your feet off the ground. The problem is then where do you go with it? And so, Steve, you've had a unique opportunity to work in some very recognizable names that we oftentimes can't talk about per se, but you can talk about in generalities, like here is how this technology functions well at a huge scale, at an enterprise level. And so would you be open to talking about some of that as we go into the next 500 episodes, if you had the time to do so?
What would you do if I said no?
Well, you'd really be putting me on the spot now. I might suggest starting at your house. If you were to crack open the doors and give us a peek inside, what might that look like?
Well, you're going to have to open up quite a few doors, let me tell you. Between the I don't know. I've got 70-odd services, 4 KVM hosts, a couple of container hosts, 8 different VLANs, several ZFS storage servers. All of that is shoved in various places throughout my house. So it will take us a little while to walk through that.
Okay, so it's a lot of doors, but so maybe we break this up into a number of different iterations, and you take us along a journey over like a series.
Yeah, I was thinking, one of the things that I find interesting is when people talk about what they've done. Like if I listen to a Home Assistant podcast, pick a random thing, I'm interested to find out and honestly steal from what other people are doing and kind of incorporate that into their own. So I was thinking maybe we divide this up into, we'll call them segments, loosely speaking. You know me, I like to be organized. I don't like to just go off the cuff in terms of when I am ingesting data, I want it in a thematic way. And so when I present the data, I also want to present it in a thematic way. And that helps me to stop rambling, I suppose. So with that in mind, some of the sort of stuff that we've got planned for this segment is things like we're going to talk about what am I doing with networking. We may talk about backup and storage, but that could be a little boring for people. We may skip that one. We'll talk about things like what are you doing for the source of truth and the type of automation that's in the house, or how are you viewing everything? How are you keeping your eyes on these things to make sure that they continue working? What are you doing for home automation? What about, like, everybody's got some sort of media. If you're doing some sort of self-hosting, one of the things that gets people into self-hosting is actually a Jellyfin or a Plex or a Kodi. For me, it was Kodi way back in the day. That, like, we're talking whenever XBMC was first ported over to the computers is when I first started doing things with media. So all of those sorts of themes, we're looking at kind of extracting my lab and the supporting services into those kind of thematic areas.
I love it. Okay, well, where would you start from?
Well, so one of the things that is really interesting to talk about for me is when you think about how do you stand up a reliable set of services. In my work, we always have to have a stable base to work from, and there is nothing more important in that regard than the network. Every service in a lab depends on the network, and if the network goes down, it doesn't really matter if your application's working because nobody can get there. So I thought we'd kind of start by talking about, I like this pattern of work from the wall out when you're troubleshooting. So is it plugged in? Is it turned on? All those sorts of things. So from that perspective, assuming everything is all plugged in and turned on, you start with the networking equipment. And in this case, lots of people depend on the internet. Not a lot of people have their house set up in such a way that it can withstand a fault tolerance from the internet. So let's start with the router.
Okay.
What do you run for a router?
I have three. I have what I would call my WAN router, so it's the thing that goes straight into the cable modem, and that is running at the moment OpenWRT. Then I have my, probably what you have and what most people have, my quote-unquote home router, which is running pfSense. And then I have my lab router, which is, that's what separates, Steve, my, like, well, here's what I'm playing with, from my wife going, hey, the internet's out, right? So that allows me to have some separation there. And that's running OpenSense, because I believe in the very near future we are going to make a transition with all of our clients from pfSense to OpenSense. I'm trying to get my own head wrapped around what that looks like.
So I tried to do something like that. Actually, I tried to do almost exactly that initially without WRT, but just with pfSense and then having OpenSense in my lab, and that fell over for me for a whole bunch of reasons. Part of it is the way that I have architected pfSense. If you think of a triangle, right, or a pyramid, pfSense is right at the very tippy top, and everything flows from it. So my router flows into pfSense. So I should say my modem. The cable modem flows into the pfSense, and then pfSense has 8 different VLANs, and all of those VLANs come down a single trunk line into a managed switch. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but pfSense, for people that may not know, most of our audience is going to know, but pfSense is a free BSD based firewall, and one of the main things that I do with it is the VLAN. But there are several things that I had to do in order to layer on top of it to make it suit what I'm looking for. So one of the things that has been trouble in the past is pfSense doesn't actually have a native API. And when I first started with pfSense, that wasn't that big of a deal, because the level of automation was wife poking husband, go fix this thing. Husband logging into machine and fixing thing. So I guess you could call it the automated poking. I was always aware when something was wrong. But as things have evolved, I have wanted to do things like apply my own certificates to it. So when you hit the pfSense, it doesn't have the self-sign cert, it has my Let's Encrypt It cert. On top of that, I run a bunch of other services like Prometheus Exporter. I run 2 different VPN services on it for reasons we're not going to go into. But at any rate, the whole point of that is to say my pfSense is very much customized, and there are a few packages, not many, but I think 2 or 3 packages that I actually had to drop into FreeBSD in order to install from the default repos there. So pfSense is absolutely one of those things that currently is critical to my house. When I was looking at this, there's a couple other things that I looked at. You mentioned OpenWRT and OpenSense. Both of those are on my list of things that I had looked at for as an alternative. I also looked at BIOS. So if you were starting out today with no preconceived notion or baggage from clients, would you look at something like iOS or a Linux-based one, or would you stick with something like OpenSense or
Maybe
OpenWRT?
the thing that would, I think, even if I just walked into this blind, never having any experience in IT at all, I think what would land me at OpenSense pretty quickly, and it would be a hard thing to drive me off of, is that's where all the community momentum is. So, like, just coming into it blind, like, if I didn't know anything about anything that happened, any of the baggage, any of that, I think if I walked in today, I would look at pfSense and I would go, huh, that's interesting. They don't really publish a community version anymore. That's interesting. They haven't updated it, and they're not really pushing new updates, and you can't really get new versions. Huh, I wonder what that's about. And then I would do a quick internet search, and I would quickly land on, okay, the project forked. OpenSense is where all the momentum is now. You get updates basically every 2 weeks, and this is where you have a question. You look at, 10 years ago, it was you'd go and say, how do I do this thing? And pfSense is where all those tutorials would come up. Today, it's in OpenSense. I don't know if I've ever seen any of the go-to tutorial people do iOS. It's something you'd have to specifically, seek out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I probably would fall under the same category, and honestly, I'm probably going to go that route. We've kind of talked about in the past, this is just an aside, but we had talked about in the past how I was working on writing a migration program from pfSense to OpenSense. I think I'm going to go back to that, and I'm going to revive that. Now, you might ask, well, why wouldn't you just have an AI agent point them at both boxes and do that? I'm like, I could do that. I like to do things a little more deterministically and repeatable, so that if I did this again, it's not going to cost me the same $5 or however many tokens I'm going to burn through. But I am reasonably sure that I'm going to migrate to OpenSense. Eventually, the community edition of pfSense is going to be out of date long enough that I'm going to be uncomfortable running it. So, though that will be a thing in the future for me, I'm sure. But for right now, I have other things that I need to tackle, and I'll get on to that. So, one of the other areas of the network that are closely coupled with pfSense is my Pi-hole instance. Now, I have a very bizarre setup when it comes to how to manage things with DNS and DHCP. pfSense manages some of that, and Pi-hole manages other parts of that. And that has to do with my VLAN setup. So the VLAN setup for we'll call it the primary VLAN, the one that the media center lives on and all of that, that runs through Pi-hole. But I have various isolated networks to include my lab network and stuff like that, that I don't want to spin up another version of Pi-hole. I don't want to make Pi-hole have to handle multiple VLAN NICs and all of the rest of that. So Pi-hole handles one of them, and pfSense handles everything else. So for myself, the way that I'm using Pi-hole, I am using it for the blocking, and I have a block list of like, I don't know, 1.5 million or something like that. But primarily I'm using this for the DNS resolver and the DHCP. I know. Anybody out there typing that it says I can do this with DNS mask or pick a solution, I probably have actually done it for a significant period of time in the past, and this is just what I fell on. I think in general, Pi-hole does a really good job of doing the ad blocking, and it just does the thing well with a nice UI. Some of the alternatives that have been kicking around out there for this are things like Technidium and AdGuard Home, both of which have their various integration points. But one of the things that Pi-hole has going for it is, I guess, brand recognition from the standpoint of a lot of other projects out there actually have, let's say, Pi-hole awareness. So, for example, I have LabDash. We'll not get into the long and short of it, but essentially it's like a link aggregator for your house. Nice.
Actually, do you mind talking to me about that? Because it was one of those things that, like, the first time you showed that to me, I remember kind of being like, well, what is that? And then it was like no big deal to you, but from my perspective, I was looking at it, I'm like, I've never seen such a thing before.
So I'll give you a brief overview, but maybe we'll peg the rest of this into when we talk about more of the services. But essentially, when you have 70 odd services and you have people who are not you who who did not stand up the service and have to remember where everything is, a place that you can put the links to all of the things you run in your house is very useful. And so there's lots of these out there that are just dashboards that you run in your house, and you can have weather and all of these sorts of things. The point of bringing that up was more that Pi-hole has plugins for every one of these that I have ever seen. So you can get like Pi-hole statistics right there. Pi-hole is very well understood and supported between Prometheus and all of these different things because of the way that it has evolved over time. And so for me, again, the same reason why pfSense or OpenSense would win out is because there's that backing, like the momentum behind the thing. And so there are newer versions of things like Pi-hole, but for me, it's actively maintained. It does the job. I'm not going to touch it. Are you running Pi-hole?
I stopped when I funneled all my traffic over California, and ads ceased to become an issue because they blocked me, so I don't have to block them.
Well, one of the other differences that you and I have is I will run an OpenVPN or a Tailscale to get into my house, and I don't believe you do currently do that, do you?
No, I used to. I used to do things the quote-unquote normal way, and then partly because I am trying to scale down to the most minimalistic thing possible, and I wanted to know what's the minimum amount of internet I can live with. Partly because it makes the kid's life challenging to do. I mean, you're not really doing social media stuff on the internet if you don't really have a whole lot of internet. And partly because I wanted to play with AirVPN and the concept of VPN-only tunneling. All of those led me down the road of funneling my entire internet connection through a VPN. And because of that, there's no way to kind of reverse it. But there has been, like on a different episode, it's not a tonight thing, but I've made some progress by way of using OpenWRT to connect as a client to another network. So you can flash OpenWRT into some really powerful radios that will allow you to connect to open networks that are around your area, and then that becomes the internet connection. And you'll say, well, but Noah, those probably are only 10, 15 megs. Well, that's great. That's what I've been living with for the last 2 years, and it seems to work. So now there's a natural progression there, but that's down the road.
So all that to say is Noah doesn't try to get into his house from the outside, but
I can't, so nobody else can either.
That, I suppose that's true. On the flip side, we use Tailscale and OpenVPN. So I should back up a little bit. OpenVPN is still in use by me, but the genesis of this, as always, is the stupid iPhone. Oh, that thing has been no end of problems for me.
The tickle.
Sorry?
The tickle is every time I think of iPhone.
It is a wonderful end-user device that is hostile to everything except for itself. It's one of those, if you could personify an iPhone, I picture a very snobby, stuck-up person that's very good at their job. Everything else is just beneath them, and they'll do it if they absolutely have to, but they're not going to do it any more than they need to. So OpenVPN was not wonderful on the iPhone. And like I do every time that I mention something about the iPhone, there are people that are going to write in and be like, I use this on my iPhone all the time. I'm like, okay, I have a sample size of 2. We have 2 iPhones. It didn't work on either one of them particularly well. So
It's your wife's. What's the second?
We have a spare phone because my wife, when we moved here, instead of because they didn't want the Canadian phone, we just bought a new phone with the phone plan, and so now we have a spare iPhone. It's an iPhone 8, so ancient, but we have technically 3 lines with our cell phone plan. So
Gotcha.
We have 2. So at any rate, the iPhone has dictated a lot of changes in software and approaches, as we've kind of documented here. And so Tailscale was what really fit the bill. That's the only thing that has been, I'm going to say, reliable with air quotes, because it still has strange issues from time to time. Like sometimes she can leave it on all the time and be absolutely fine with it, and there are other times where it's on and she's in the house and she has to turn it off because it just stops allowing her to access something. So outside the house, it's always been wonderful. Can turn it on, get to all the things that we need to. It's one of the ways that we get to Home Assistant is we don't expose Home Assistant to the internet, so you have to get into our network in order to hit it. So Tailscale's definitely been much easier for her by far, and it's been part of my standardized deployment now for any device that's kind of mobile, and it's been very useful for that. So honorable mention here is something called Trayscale, which is just a UI front end for Linux, for Tailscale in general, and that has made it accessible to them absent like an official client. But if you're looking for something other than Tailscale, you could use the self-hosted version of the control server, which is called Headscale. There's something called Zero Tier, which is kind of similar to Tailscale. There's also Netbird and just plain old WireGuard as some things if you're all interested in what's out there in that genre.
So, do you host Headscale yourself?
We do not, no.
So you just use the service?
I do.
Okay.
Yep. In the event that that ever happened, I would do something. Like, we would find a way around it. I would do Netbird, or maybe I'd try Headscale. I'm a little bit cautious of running the control server myself, because then that puts all of the pressure on that thing being up. So there's a little bit of like,
Well,
I don't
yes.
know how to make this high availability.
Yes and no, but I mean, like, to a degree, it's just another I mean, if PFSense goes down, Tailscale is hosed anyway.
That's true, but PFSense is on hardware, and I have years of experience actually watching as the software itself never died.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had PFSense just break.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how many times I've pulled the power or lost power or done any number of terrible things to it.
Mm-hmm.
The software
I
itself
agree.
has never not worked.
I agree. It's the hardware underneath that dies. But I mean, like, if you were to host, I don't have any experience hosting the head end of Tailscale, but I have plenty of experience hosting WireGuard, and effectively it would just be keeping a Linux box up and running.
I would think so. I'm super gun shy on some of these types of things because of my experience early on with Matrix and how like it just fell over on me multiple times. Like there's a few projects I understand complexity is different, but like I've had Matrix fall over on me. I've had Image fall over on me. I've had several of them just like fall off the map from my perspective. And not to throw to equally throw shade on everything, there have also been Red Hat products in the past that have just fallen over on me. And so it's just one of those things that when I consider it absolutely critical, like a hardware failure is just something I can throw my hands up and go, like nothing I can do about it if the hardware actually fails while I'm away. If the software just hiccups and that's me to control, and it stops something from like letting the dog sitter in when we're away on vacation, that's a problem.
Okay, so it's not so much the failure that bothers you, it's the unexplained failure that bothers you. So when it's a hardware thing and you wrap your head around it and go, well, the hard drive died, that's why it went down, and then you understand it, and so now we can move on. When you set up a software stack, and the software stack falls over, and you look over it and go, nope, the hardware's running just fine, everything was installed right, everything was right, why did this fail? That's what's unpalatable to you. Is that what you're telling me?
In the general vicinity, but again, I've never had OpenVPN just fail on me. So like the problem is I have known things that I'm like, this is critical to me, and it has never failed just because it's been running. Whereas if I start hosting Headscale and it stops working, I get a call from the wife and says, I can't get to Home Assistant or my audiobooks. That one's becoming even more critical now that we're up to like 200 or 300 audiobooks on Audiobookshelf. Getting the call, because now it's everybody in the house. I get pinged by both of my kids and my wife when they can't do something with the audiobook server. So if Headscale disrupted that and it causes me problems, that would be a problem for me.
Okay.
So just kind of rounding off the other little bits and bobs in the networking. So I mentioned having a managed switch. I'm using the Unify managed switch. You can make your arguments for or against. I've been in the ecosystem a while. It would take a lot to move me because at the end of the day, it does what I need. I hate that they keep changing the Unify controller UI, but it still does what I need it to do. And so it is acting as my core switch, if you're familiar with that kind of terminology. So it handles figuring out where all the VLANs are to go, and I think I've got a 24-port one. I can't remember, but it's fairly big. I actually had to upgrade it from the 8 because I kept getting crunched. So I've looked at the Omada series from TP-Link. I know that there's an alternative from Aruba, and you could also go with, you've been trying to pitch me on OpenWRT.
Well, no, for switches, I would try to pitch you on Cisco. Just because their new small business line is price point is on par with Unify, but the feature set, it's full Cisco iOS with web UI.
I could totally get on board with that. I'm not tied to the switch, but we're talking like a major rug pull, because it would be the switch, it would be 2 switches and 6 access points or something like that at this point. And so talk about vendor lock-in.
Here's a question for you. What would be the pivot point where you would be like, okay, can't tolerate that anymore? Like what change would Ubiquiti have to make, or what thing, like if they said, I'll give you a starting point. I'm guessing if they said you can't self-host the controller anymore,
yes,
that's a no-go for you. Well, and the reason I asked that is that's what 3CX did. So they followed a very similar path in that, here, self-hosted, here's a thing, but it's proprietary, but it's self-hostable, so that'll be good enough. And it was, until it wasn't. And then all of a sudden they decided, you can't do that anymore. So what are some of the pinch points that would say, okay, that's it, I'm out?
That would be the primary one. That and requiring me to have some sort of cloud account just to log into my local devices. Like that'd be nope, that's not happening.
Okay.
Other than that, honestly, it's hardware. And even I would have a hard time. What you would have to do, you personally, Noah, would have to bring down better access points and show me like how deficient my access points are, because they seem to be, well, other than all of the weird Wi-Fi problems that I have, they seem to generally just function. Like I don't have to do much to them. They do exactly what they need to do. And so I would be hesitant to move away from that, but I wouldn't change out the core switch without changing out the access points.
Okay.
It'd be one or everything. So the last thing that falls under this category is I actually run a Squid proxy. Back in the day, I actually ran this because I used it specifically for the caching server part of things, because I had DSL that was like 1.5 megs. I lived in a little town, not even a town. It did not qualify as a town. No, I'm not kidding. I lived in an intersection area. So there was a gas station on either side of this highway at the intersection, and if you turned right, if you were heading north and you turned right, there were 2 little tiny subdivisions back in there, one of which I lived in. And by tiny, I mean like 7 or 8 houses. I don't actually know why they just randomly picked this place, because if you looked on a map, it's like farmland and trees and then this little intersection, and why there's like 40 houses in this area. But anyways, all that to say is infrastructure pretty non-existent there. So we used the Squid proxy to drastically improve our internet surfing capabilities. Nowadays, I'm using it for, we'll say, content control. So I've implemented SSL bumping, which is where you're essentially doing a man-in-the-middle attack on your own stuff. So Squid issues a CA, and the clients have to trust that CA. Squid makes the request on your behalf, decrypts the traffic, then re-encrypts it with its own certificate and sends it on. And part of that is needing to be able to audit what is being searched for in the house. And that has become more of an issue for us for various reasons. And instead of just blocking everything or really trying to ratchet it down, I'd rather take the approach of, I will let you fail. I will allow you to do the bad thing, but just know that there's a chance that you're going to get caught doing the bad thing. And so that's the approach we've taken. And so Squid is the way that we ended up doing that. So that's kind of the whirlwind tour of our premises from a networking perspective. If you're interested in like the specifics of like how many switches we have and like how many ports I'm actually using in my house, all that sort of stuff, you can write in and ask, but we didn't cover that because that could just be boring stuff. So, if the networking layer ever goes down, everything goes down. And that's why everything that I have in the house is as redundant as possible. Pi-hole is the one thing that I've not made redundant yet, and I've stressed yet because I've started actually planning that out. I just have to think about how I'm going to implement the failover. I'm thinking I'm going to use something like, VRRD or something like that, where there's a virtual IP and there's some failover happening, but still working through that. But yeah, that's the tour of the network.
Okay, so a couple questions for you. One is your thought with so the router isn't necessarily failover, but your thought there is that isn't really on you. The internet is kind of where you draw your demarcation point. So as long as everything on your network is up, that's where you would draw that line. Is that?
Yeah.
Understanding that right?
We're not going to pay for a redundant internet connection, and if the internet connection goes down, there isn't much you can do about it.
Okay, and then as far as the switches or access points, that sort of thing, your thought there is, yeah, they're dependent upon the controller, but it's not like they stop passing traffic. Looking at you, Cisco Meraki. Not like they stop passing traffic if it can't reach the controller. So it's redundant in that the equipment will survive with or without the controller. So the controller isn't really needed for high availability. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the controller is just if you need to make changes, and you can still SSH into all the things to make changes if you need to. So at the end of the day, you're right. I guess technically I don't have redundancy in the controller, but I've never considered that as... I interact with it so infrequently that I honestly didn't even come on my radar as something I would actually need redundancy for.
Are you able and willing to give us kind of a teaser as to what's coming next? So what is the next part? What's the next door that we get to open and kind of explore now?
So depending on the level of feedback that we get, I can go into a little bit of the storage and the backup of what I'm doing here at home. If that sounds too boring, the next thing that I was thinking of is going into things like, in work we call it source of truth. So where do my configurations live? Are they deployed? How are things stored around the network? That sort of stuff, so that I can make sure I don't have that dependency on the internet. Because part of this is, like you said, my demarcation is that modem up front. If that line got cut, I still need to be able to function. And so as part of that, the critical things are hosted in-house.
What, think about how to ask this. What would you say are the things that you learned at work that you brought and you're like, this is what a professional architect does. So if I'm going to architect my home, this is what I'm going to do here, versus what, you know what I'm saying? What lessons did you borrow from to say, this is what I'm implementing here, versus I'm just sick of this thing going down, and so I'm gonna put a solution. So I'll give you an example. Here's a good comparison. You did something different with the way that you did Home Assistant, right? Nobody at work tells you to go get an Intel NUC and virtualize it and then put a little thing over there. There's different ways to handle that. So that's an area where you were like, in my home, this is the way I'm going to achieve this reliability. Now you would say, and I know that you and I disagree on this, you would say it's over-engineered. But how do you decide, here's the thing I'm going to take and borrow from work versus here's where I'm going to diverge and I'm going to do this a different way because it'll get me the end goal of what I'm looking for in my house in a different way?
That's a really difficult question, partly because I think you and I would have a hard time divorcing our work from our core personality.
Absolutely. And to some degree, that's why your clients and my clients get what they're paying for, right? Because when we're doing something, both of us would do it as if it was our own box.
Yes, 100%. And so sometimes it's really hard to know what influences what thing. I can say that the observability stuff is 100% things that I intentionally implemented to mock out what I would do similarly at work. That is one area I can say absolutely made the conscious choice. I didn't look for competing products or any other way to do it. This is how we do it. Like, this is our stack at work, so this is what I'm going to do at home. And part of that is familiarity. And part of that is making sure that I am actively using some of these things. So I'll give you a quick for instance. One of the things that really helped recently was, because I'm using the Prometheus stack and I've tried it in all kinds of different configurations here at home, there's a bunch of stuff that I just know because I've run into them that meant that I didn't have to go look it up. So we get some warning. One of the clients we're doing an audit for, we got a warning. And I looked at that, and the consultant that I'm working with was asking, like, what is this about? And I'm like, I just was rattling it off the top of my head. Because I have run into all those problems at home, I'm like, I know exactly what that error is and where that error is coming from, because, like, I stubbed my toe on that bad enough that I had to re-architect what I'm doing here. And so there's definite benefits to being able to do those sort of things.
Okay, so that prompts another question then. How much of your home lab do you see as a function of professional development? In fact, I asked that question knowing full well that you're the guy that gave a presentation a few months on, if you do your home lab right, it's professional development and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of stole your own thunder on that one. It is largely, well, again, because it is intrinsic to my level of interest in various things, they bleed over. And I have found tremendous benefit in uncovering what is interesting to me and then being able to figure out how to apply it at work. And so it may not start out as trying to link the thing I'm doing at home to the thing that I do at work, but it turns out that if you've been able to be paired with a job that has some level of your own expression in it, the thing that you really like to do, not everybody's going to love everything about their job and not everything is going to be a perfect fit. But there are aspects of your job that you probably really like and can link to something that you do in your personal life if you were motivated to do that. And so it's the choices that are made here are often, sometimes they're born out of fighting the fire and seeing what other people have struggled with or been really successful with. But part of it is just for the love of exploring. Sometimes it's, I make a choice at home, turns out this is not actually production ready, and so I know to avoid that, or I find the rough areas and I know how to work around them. So I don't know that it's necessary. I'd like to say it was conscious choices. That would give me way too much foresight, though.
Interesting. All right, well, I guess we'll hang tight, Steve, for round two, and we can dig a little bit deeper. So what I'm hearing is, I'm pretty sure I heard you say this. You may have not used this exact words, but the sentiment was there. If people appreciate what you're doing, if they want to hear more, then they need to write in and let you know at live@asknoahshow.com. This is what's working really well, and this is what I really like, or this is really terrible, and I don't like this aspect. And it's okay to be critical, because that's what we're looking for as we kind of look to shape some of these things. But you need to hear from people to either give you the dopamine hits to continue to do this, put the work in, the effort, and come share all of this stuff, or the critical feedback to redirect so that you know what you're steering towards.
I am much more appreciative of the critical feedback. It's nice to hear we like what you're doing. Maybe this borders on arrogance, but I assume if someone doesn't tell me that I'm doing the wrong thing, that I'm going in the right direction. So,
our first email comes in from Jeremy writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I've been listening on and off since the show started, and I wanted to share my gratitude for the show in general. I remember the first episode, and since then, it's become maybe one of 6 podcasts on my phone that I enjoy the most. I remember during the boot up of COVID hysteria that you were still showing up just as positive and friendly as before, still geeking out about Linux. This positivity struck me, and because there were very few people that were positive about anything anywhere, for those desperate to hear something different, it was a relief. I recall meeting you in Bellingham at Linux Fest Northwest, and I found you to be friendly and helpful in general. I began to realize that these Linux Fest events, especially the free volunteer-led ones, could spark the interests for the next generation into engineering and technology as well as into open source. Unlike the corporate world, and even the college, there's no LeetCode code pass in the interview. No course, no due next week, no cost other than your time to learn something new. This is not often discussed, but it's one of the blessings of open source. There's no barriers to getting involved and to learning how to solve your own problems. Thanks for contributing to the open source and Linux community. I know that it's had benefits beyond the council. Looking forward to the next 500 episodes. Best, Jeremy." That was a cool email, and it was particularly timely for our 500th episode.
So I think he hit the nail on the head with you about your positivity. I hate it.
Because you're an eternal, you're not a pessimist, but you're an eternal pragmatist.
I am.
Yeah.
I don't actually hate it, but it's one of those things that I have noticed about Noah. You are always positive. Even the side of Noah that I get to see through our friendship, where he's just really angry at something that has happened, or on rare occasion at someone who has done something. Mm-hmm. Even that, he's like, I probably should learn to be more understanding. And I was like, man, if I was in your situation, I wouldn't be saying I need to be more understanding.
Well, the world needs some more of that, I guess. So thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. Really, as helpful or as kind as it is, and as encouraging as it is to hear about the great things and how well things are going, Steve and I really need? We kind of need you to be hypercritical.
Yeah.
We kind of need you to tear us down, if I'm honest with you. And it's not a bad thing. We won't take it personally. But the ways in which we can improve over the next 500 episodes so that they're better than the first 500 is really helpful. I don't know how many times we've had this conversation in the last 24 hours. We're kind of talking about this, but the ability to improve or to do things better only happens if we have feedback. And sometimes that can be hard to get. People are polite. They want to be nice. They don't want to tear anything down. It's the whole... Your mother always told you if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. That's true to an extent. But also, we're looking to grow. We're looking to sharpen the sword. We're looking for the iron to become sharper, and that only happens if it hits against iron. So, if you have thoughts, be constructive about them. But please, live at AskNoahShow.com and say, hey, you know what? In the next 500 episodes, I'd really appreciate it if you guys did more of this. In the next 500 episodes, I'd really appreciate it if you guys did less of this. I love the show, but when you guys go into this, I just kind of tune out or I skip over or whatever it is. Is that a helpful way to say that?
Yeah, I would say that treat this as if it's an AI that you're correcting, right? It's produced some level of result you're generally happy with, but you're just going to try and fine-tune it a little bit.
So Steve and I have been having a debate. It's really kind of an ongoing battle. Blood has been shed on both sides. And it's really desktop or laptop. Okay, so now, Steve, you looked at me almost like I had 3 eyes when I told you, Steve, I'm getting rid of my desktop and I'm going laptop only and Thunderbolt dock. And you were like, why? And then I said, what you thought to be even crazier, you should get rid of your desktop and consider going laptop. And then you were like, that's just crazy talk. So what is it about having a physical desktop anchored in one place, highly immovable, highly immobile? What is it about that appeals to you?
It's more powerful. It has multiple screens. I like the screens. It's got sound set up. Mm-hmm. It's got my mechanical keyboard. Mm-hmm. And no, I'm not going to lug my mechanical keyboard around with my laptop. I already carry my Steam Deck, so backpack's getting a little full to begin with.
So there's a couple of things, and I've documented this journey at docs.mindrep1.com. So if you want to go read about this, I've actually written this up. So essentially, if I told you, if I said the IBM Aptiva from the 90s, does that mean anything to you?
Yes.
Okay. So they had a design in where they had like this little like desktop looking thing, like platform that sat on the desk. The monitor went over it, and the mouse and the keyboard all plugged into that, and then there was a single like PCI style cable that went down and plugged into the tower that sat below the desk. So I got to thinking to myself, and I said, if I was going to design a workstation, how would I build it into the desk? So you're buying monitors and you mount them into the desk. You buy like an Ergotron thing. Ergotron goes into the desk, the monitors are there. And then how do I reduce the amount of cable clutter? And so, and particularly this became prominent in the age of sit-stand desks, right? Where I increasingly I'm being asked to like, hey, you need to install this workstation, and Susie needs to be able to sit when she wants and stand when she wants, and it has to go up and down and all the things, and she's got 15 doodads that come out and all the rest of it, right? So what I found is if you take a power splitter, mount it to the bottom of the desk, plug all of the things that are going to be in the desk all to that power splitter, then you take the keyboard, your mechanical keyboard that you like so much, a good solid mouse, the speakers, all of the peripherals, and you attach those to a Thunderbolt dock. I think even if I was going to do a desktop, I would make the argument that you take your multiple monitors and run those into a Thunderbolt dock and then run the Thunderbolt dock to your desktop. What would you think about that?
Why? Yeah. So
I'm glad you asked.
Well, I mean, so from my case, I have a fairly decent graphics card, and running Thunderbolt into the motherboard gets me what from my fancy graphics card?
So I haven't tried, so I don't know this to be true. But my understanding of the way is because Thunderbolt is on the PCI bus, your graphics card is still going to do all the processing, but I believe it will just output through that Thunderbolt dock. Because
That seems that seems like an extra layer. Why would I do that? Right? Where you've gone and said, okay, now I'm completely talking out of ignorance. Right? We'll make that clear. You can feel free to write in and tell me how dumb this sounds, but to me, logically speaking, if you take the cable and plug it into the Thunderbolt port, then it has to traverse inside the computer across PCI lanes to get into the graphics card, to come back out, traverse across the PCI lanes, and then back out the Thunderbolt port.
Yes, that's probably accurate.
Why would I do that?
Because it looks way neater than having all.
That's a really good way to sell me on something.
All the DisplayPort cables that are coming out. If you think about it, you've got, so if you have two monitors, you got two DisplayPort cables, right? If you have speakers, then you got an audio cable. If you have a keyboard and mouse, you got two USB cables, or maybe a USB receiver. I suppose you use as a wired mouse. No Animal exists anymore, but likely a wired keyboard. And so you got all these cables that go into the desktop.
Sure, except then you're like, that's a very binary thing saying you have to have a Thunderbolt cable. Well, no, I have almost what you're talking about, except I have a USB 3 hub on my desk that plugs in all of those things except for the monitor. So, again, why?
Yeah, so the way that I have started to try to think about that is separating the desk from the computing unit. So and actually, you know what? You have approached this bridge. You just solved it a slightly different way. But so you're using your desktop, but all of a sudden, client XYZ shows up and they go, no, Steve, you can't use that computer. You have to use our computer. And they hand you whatever machine, right? Now you unplug your Thunderbolt cable from your machine and you plug it into whatever theirs is, and boom, your multi-monitors are there, your mechanical keyboard is there, your mouse is there, and now you're working off of their machine. And when you're done, you plug it back into yours. Does that appeal to you?
No, not really, because I usually don't do the primary work on the client machine.
Okay. You do your work on your machine, and then you just remote into the client machine if you have to have it.
Right, and most clients don't even ship me a laptop anymore. They give me access to a VDI or some other facility, like with the, let's say, advent of the cloud. Confluence is out there, so Confluence being the wiki page, like lots of these things are already exposed to the internet, and I'm on, like, they give me an RCA token, they give me, like, standard security practices so that I could access things over the web anyways. So for me in particular, I don't spend a lot of time on the client device. Even when I'm deving and have to work in their environment, I dev locally, make some sort of generic code that is then imported into their environment and then customized in such a way that it will work in their environment on the laptop. So there's very minimal work happening there.
So there's basically no way to getting you to Thunderbolt, is what I'm hearing.
Well, you can get me a Thunderbolt, but you haven't answered the question of why. Like, why would I make my computer do the extra work?
It's separate. Well, first, I'd be interested to know, is there extra work? And you may very well be right, because I don't know how you get that traffic across the motherboard without eating up more PCI lanes. So you could absolutely be right. But where this idea actually spawned from is, have you seen the Mac Pros? They don't really have anything other than Thunderbolt on it. So you want to run the monitor, you run it through Thunderbolt. You want to plug your keyboard and mouse in, you plug it. Everything it's like a whole bunch of USB-C ports.
So wait, let me get this straight. On the show where the last 500 episodes we've said, come here and ask us questions about doing things with open source and Linux.
Right.
And then you're going to trot out, have you seen how this most proprietary closed down system does their thing? That's the angle you're going to use to convince me?
Yes.
Well, you're honest. You failed.
I believe that there is a world in which we separate the things that we as the humans interface with the things that we're connecting to, and increasingly that thing is becoming more fragmented. Sometimes it belongs to work, sometimes it belongs to us, sometimes it's on the cloud, sometimes it's just a placeholder. So is there value? Like, I don't want to have to redo my desk every time that changes. And so I found myself in this predicament where the monitors had one type of connector, bought a new graphics card, it had a different type of connector, and now I'm finding myself like trying to undo all these cables that were built through the Ergotron mount to redo it. And I started to think to myself, why not go back to the Aptiva of the 90s style and build the monitors and the desk and the keyboard and the mouse as one thing, and then my PCI cable that goes to the computer.
I can see that, like, I can completely see that for integrated graphics, sure.
Okay. But
right?
once you get to a dedicated graphics
then
card,
I ask why,
yeah.
right? Even if it is minimal, the question is still like, why would I do that? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be... You could make an argument for what you're talking about, but if I was going to do that, all the monitors have a second port anyways. If I was going to just do that for the case of a client laptop, I'd have the Thunderbolt thing and the extra, like, tiny cables from the monitor to that I would just go into the client laptop.
Okay. So maybe you would consider like Thunderbolt as like a secondary thing.
For my primary desktop?
No. I like a secondary, like you've got a client laptop or you got a second machine that you're working on.
Sure.
Okay. All right. We'll start there and we'll grow.
You feel like you won?
I eventually got some way to say yes.
You did.
That's definitely.
Are you going to sell me on a white case next?
White case? It's cheese grater, silver.
But fine. But we don't have silver. Is not as available as white. You're winning the baby steps here, right?
Okay.
White, then silver, then I'm going to have like some sort of little screen that can display a logo.
I would prefer little heads inside of the machine.